Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Woke by Accident Podcast, a weekly chat about socially conscious topics impacting the culture. And we are happy to have our favorite co host, Sambaza, host and creator of the Sambaza podcast. He is a two-time nominee for Best African Diasporan Podcast by the APVA. He is also from the Republic of Kenya in East Africa. And he has been a presenter at the iFrozen Audio Podcast Festival discussing Pan Africanism, and he will be an ambassador for the 2024 Afrozen Audio Podcast Festival. Welcome, Sambaza.
Oh, thank you, Jen. Um, nice day today.
Yes. So thank you guys for catching this podcast when you catch it. We are at a different time, but you will catch us on Wednesday as well. So we have a special guest and thoughts about our special guest or anything before we introduce our special guest, Sambaza.
It's one of those things. I think I'll tell people collaborations, and it is all about autism
Mhm.
awareness. And we are actually going to get somebody who's going to give us great information about autism. And I'm really anxious to hear what he has to say.
For sure. We have been doing some conversations and discussions that you guys may have noticed about mental health and autism, and you definitely want to continue that conversation and bring in some folks and content creators and counselors and different perspectives. And so we have a great guest today who will continue on in that conversation and can add some great information about overcoming those obstacles that people may face when dealing with autism and other mental health challenges. And so we will talk about our next guest. So, our next guest is a veteran counselor and creator of the Mind the Autism podcast, Stone G. And Stone G resides in beautiful Australia. And he has graciously agreed to have a conversation with us today about his show and how he has achieved success in spite of many obstacles. And so, welcome, Stone G.
Thank you, Jen, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, especially for the audience. I hope it's something that is going to enrich their experience.
Definitely. I appreciate you joining us, and I'm glad that you were able to coordinate a time to get together and have this conversation to share with our community, and for you to share about your community as well.
Sure.
Okay. And
All right,
some
we'll
buzz.
start right in, and I'm going to start quickly. Well, right down to it. And on a recent episode on your podcast, which you have called Mind the Autism, you reveal your autism diagnosis that came about later in your life. This was with Dr. Ella Allen, and this was
Yes.
on episode number 4, right? The the hypnotherapist. Um,
Yes.
Share with us what led to the determination and what were you experiencing then?
Well, it's an unfolding, and all of us, if we're a human being, we're going through this unfolding. And with my life, I grew up in Japan, and I'm African American, and uh, I didn't know. I knew that there was something that was different about me because I didn't relate to the world in the way that most other people did, and I certainly behaved differently, and I was constantly trying to fix that. I was trying to appear normal. So I attempted to excel when I was in the military. I became a hypnotherapist, a counselor. I was a personal trainer. I got into medical school. Currently, my academic track is to become a clinical psychologist. So there are always things that I was trying to do to fix me, and it wasn't until I had something called a burnout, an autistic burnout, where in addition to not being able to mask the way I had previously, I was also having more episodes of seizures. because epilepsy is can be a co-occurring condition for autistic people. And so I was having more seizures, and as I was going through the diagnostic process to understand what was happening, my doctor very gently suggested, well, here are some of the symptoms that are matching up. And at that time, I really didn't know what it was. And initially I was puzzled. I wasn't afraid. And as I started to research more, I thought, oh, well, this certainly lines up. This makes a lot of sense. It checked all these boxes. So I've been quite fortunate in that I have approached it from both an academic perspective and I've looked at the cultural competence perspective of it because there's intersectionality. I'm not just an autistic person. I'm also a Black man, and I also have co-occurring conditions, and I'm an immigrant, and I travel, and there are a lot of things that I do. I'm not just one thing. I can't just identify as a man because I'm also a father, and there are many things.
Right.
So I think for me, when the diagnosis was complete, as I said before, it was an aha moment for me, and that hasn't stopped for me. I've continued to dig even deeper. One of the interesting things about humans is that we are not able to cultivate deep, purposeful connections until we know ourself. And knowing self is a lifelong journey.
Wow. Deep. And so, with you, after being diagnosed, was your next course of action to seek therapy or treatment, or kind of walk us?
Sure. Well, that's the that's what they tend to tell people to do, is to go get therapy. But autism is not something that you need. Well, in my case, I'll make an I statement. It's not something that I needed therapy for.
Okay.
It's similar to, sometimes people will say, oh, I have autism, or and it's weird. It sounds weird for me to say. I would never say I have autism. I can say I am autistic. I am a man. I am a Black man. I would not say I have Black, or that I have. I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
It's just a part of me. It is a difference in the way that I relate to the world. But getting to your question about therapy, therapy can be supportive for people who are attempting to reconcile who they are in relation to what their community says that they are. And sometimes there's a gap. So if someone has been masking for most of their life and they don't understand where the masking begins and ends, and they don't know where their real personality, who's the real Jen, if they don't know what that is, therapy can be supportive with that. Autistic people don't have issues with communicating. They have issues with the allistic world saying, hey, autistic person, you have this problem and you have this, and we're going to treat you differently. And there have been studies that show that autistic people are, for the most part, marginalized instantly, and it's a biological reflex, because people are constantly, I'm talking about human beings, we're looking for what's different, and anything that's different, we instinctively try to push that away. So I did do therapy, but that was just to understand, okay, now I found out that I'm autistic. What isn't I'm supposed to get out of that? What am I supposed to learn? What's the next step?
And
I guess I'm
when
just.
you talk,
Mhm.
okay, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just thinking, in cases where it's found in children, young children. What can you share about that? We had spoke with a couple who had like a toddler age child dealing with it. It was hard to get that diagnosis from a doctor and get proper support. And these, parents are figuring, how can, my child is not, developing in this particular manner. And, other parents may be going through the same thing. They're noticing behaviors and they just
Yes.
want to, support the child.
Yes. Well, that's the $1 million question. I
Hmm.
remember one of my children was diagnosed as being autistic, and that was the $1 million question. How do I learn to connect with my child in the way that my child can understand? What
Hmm.
is a way that I can guide my child? And there isn't a pill for that. There isn't a,
Hmm.
a, a book for that. There's a way of being, and the way of being is to love. And I don't mean that in an esoteric kind of woo woo flowery way. I'm talking about really going down deep and being curious and loving your child, and really wanting to to deliver the best. Now that sounds odd, right? It sounds
Yeah.
odd to say that because you might think, oh, well, duh, all parents do that, but that's not true. All
Hmm.
parents don't do that.
Hmm.
Sometimes there will be parents who are allistic, and they think that they have been hard done by because their child has this diagnosis, and they're thinking, I've spoken with parents who think that they're the victim.
Hmm.
I've worked with parents who were looking for ways to get rid of their autistic child, because it was too much
Hmm.
for them to deal with. So the first way of being, and that's being a parent, right? So um, sure, there are a lot of books about parenting, but the first way of being is love. So if a parent can be love, and they can start to notice what's happening with their child, what is their sense, what are the sensory proclivities of their child, what is it that they're interested in, what are their gifts, focus on their gifts,
Hmm.
tonify those, and allow those to flourish. The other things they'll work themselves out.
Okay.
Okay. Um, Talking about the person. Well, before I get back to that part, I think I'm going to have to go back on the diagnosis. And you said you were diagnosed.
Mm,
Your episode 1 of your podcast. By the way, congratulations on the episode 1. It was really great. I watched it. Now,
yes.
Angel Protect. I guess I'm saying it right. He
Mm,
talked about self-diagnosis.
mm,
With regard to being neurodivergent or being on the spectrum. Uh,
yes.
I'd like you to explain more about your thoughts regarding that self-diagnosis, because there's now where we want to go to a professional to be diagnosed, and then here you have the individual saying that he kind of self-diagnosed himself and doesn't think
Mm,
that he needs diagnosis. And when I listened to that, I was like, wait a minute. Um, are we getting something wrong? And then, yeah, we'll
yeah,
start with that. Yeah.
I understand. Well, first off, earlier I mentioned that the way forward for deep, purposeful connection
Mhm.
is to know oneself. And I'll just expand on that a little bit. For a human being to evolve, we that evolution is done through the connections that we have with other human beings.
Hmm.
And those connections can't be strong unless we know ourselves. And I'll give you an example. Let's say, for instance, as a child, you were bullied or whatever. And so as a child, you had this story that there was something wrong with you. And so you go into adulthood thinking there's something wrong with you. And then you get into a relationship thinking there's something wrong with you. And you never challenge that thought that you had as a child. That thought is still there. It's embedded into you. And a lot of adults, they live their life with a story that they created to keep themselves safe as a child. Now, that story doesn't always go away, but it can be consciously addressed. Now, to the extent that adults can be responsible for the feelings. Now, a feeling is I'll give you so the origin of a feeling is a sensation. So you have a sensation in your body, and then from the sensation, you give that sensation meaning, and that meaning, now that sensation becomes a feeling. And from the feeling, you have the thinking, and then from the thinking, you have the action. And now you have the reality of your world. Now imagine you have one person who's doing all of that, and then you have another person coming together, and they're both doing it in a different way. So you're hearing how it's so important for us to know ourselves.
Mm.
And that's how we evolve. Now, I shared all that to say that it is a beautiful thing when someone does a self-diagnosis,
Okay.
because they are on the journey of expanding and knowing themselves. What a professional diagnosis does is you get to meet with a professional who has done the work. They're peer reviewed, and also the diagnosis, depending on what country you live in, means that you're going to have access to certain supports. For instance, the UK has an amazing system for support. Australia, I can go on and on about the amazing support networks that are available here, especially through the NDIS. I can't say that much about what's available in the US. From some of the networks that I work with, it's not as strong as what's available in Europe and in other countries. So the diagnosis, the professional diagnosis, is going to give you more support as opposed to having as opposed to doing your own self-diagnosis. But regardless of you having a professional diagnosis or self-diagnosing, for us to continue as human beings, we still need to know ourselves.
Okay.
We can't abdicate. We cannot abdicate this journey of living to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, when I found out my diagnosis, and I found out some of the other co-occurring things, and I'm saying this is me. I didn't say, "Oh, poor me."
Yeah.
let me fall upon the mercy of the state. I just said, "Oh, okay, all right." It's kind of like you have a broken hand or something. Okay, you don't use that hand until it's fixed. You just do something else. Same thing with the diagnosis. You figure out, you know, a little bit more about yourself now. Okay, now you can do things differently with more power, and sometimes even more effectively than when you were masking.
Makes sense. Now, to my question now, because that was a follow up. How has your personal experience with autism shaped your approach in counseling others? I know you're also in the school in the path to being a psychologist, right? Am I getting that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I became a counselor, and then I decided I wanted to further my education. Um, how it shaped, how autism has shaped my efficacy as a counselor is in cultural competence. So cultural competence is how I'll describe it in the simplest terms. It's recognizing the difference and the maps of different people, and being able to celebrate them,
Okay.
not accept. Acceptance is weak. That's tolerance. You don't want to be around someone that accepts you. If they celebrate you, now both of you are expanding. So cultural competence is, and I'll say this as a Black man in a Western world. Black men, there's a marginalization of Black men, and there are marginalizations of, there's a lot of intersectionalities. I'm not saying that we have the holy grail of being marginalized. I'm just pointing that out. That's the elephant in the room. Just because I'm a Black man, it does not mean that I understand how it is to be a woman or a Black woman, or to be someone of a different gender. It doesn't mean that I know how it is to be Jewish. Cultural competence means that I set aside my bias, even though I'm part of a marginalized community. I set aside my bias and I listen to the experience of someone else, and I take that on board and I try to get in their shoes. So realizing that I'm autistic has enhanced my cultural competence.
Okay.
And I
Definitely.
say that because there's, when you look at Hollywood or the media, there's this idea of what an autistic person is. It's
Right.
either Rain Man or The Good Doctor or Big Bang Theory, and autism
Mm.
is a spectrum. It's not just blah or blah. There's a spectrum, and the number of times someone has said, "Oh, you're not that autistic," or "Oh, you're Black, but you're not really black, or you're not like."
Mm.
so, so that's a
Mm-hmm.
demonstration of where cultural competence is lacking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always interested and learning to hear the perspective of other people, especially my clients. And I can't be effective with my clients unless I listen from their context.
Okay. And I just want to acknowledge the chat. We have 11 people viewing, and we appreciate you guys for doing that. If you guys have a question, you definitely can share. Go ahead, Sambaza.
Is this where you talk about? I know you had this episode, you and Miss, I forget her name. She was British, and
Mm.
I got them on my notes. Marianne, is it Marianne Bowler? Where
Oh,
you
right. Yeah.
talked about the fact that it wasn't about, as a counselor, you and this is where it brings about your cultural competence. You step aside and you listen to the person. She talked about this issue of being like a river, and the person who's autistic or on the spectrum in there, and then all you do is you just let them move and you guide them along their way to discover themselves rather than you
Yeah.
pointing it out, and on themselves. I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe you might want to add something on that too, on that, or even on
Sure.
that particular
Sure.
episode.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a standard counseling practice, is having this positive regard for our clients. And it floors me. It actually floors me that this is something that we have to learn, that we don't have this just as a natural part of being human.
Mhm.
How difficult is it to listen? Why is it so difficult to listen? Why is it so difficult to suspend all of this noise and just be with another human being. And part of the challenge of being autistic, I'll make an I statement, but this is substantiated by um, a lot of research, is that most autistic people will report not feeling connected with their community, that they're always having to pretend to fit in. And it's because they can't be themselves. They can't be exactly as they are. The world would label them as being weird. So in a counseling space, when someone is celebrating you and listening to you and just being present, that's a huge, huge thing.
Definitely.
I'll say amen to that.
For sure, definitely. And I appreciate you having that self out like you said, coming to terms with what you were dealing with to catch that diagnosis so that you could help others.
Hmm.
And having that desire to want to help others is huge. I mean, most people may not have wanted to do that. And you
Yeah, well, you look at you look at the you look at human consciousness, right?
mhm,
And there's this idea, philosophical idea, that we are not separate, and intellectually we all get that. We all get that we're the same thing because we're energy. And the difficulty happens when you meet someone that has a different perspective. For instance, when I'm in France, the right wing nature of France, they they are very much into the whole race thing, and
okay.
they're actively promoting that on in the media about what is French, and it's weird. And I could get mad and say, oh, you're being racist, but nah, they're doing that because whatever reason they're doing it.
Mhm.
Well, I'm not going to waste any energy, my energy. I'm not going to waste any of my energy to um, demean that, or to put it down, or to
Mhm.
because they're doing what they're doing. We are one energy and different parts. So all of these human beings, we are part of the same river.
Now, were you born in the States or no?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
that's okay.
Born.
So you're immigrant
Yeah.
being over there. Okay. Um, yeah, and so
You sound
Yeah.
like a
Of years
seasoned
and
traveler. You're all the way from
yeah,
one part of the world to the other part of the world.
yeah.
from
I spent my formative years in Japan, and then I went into the military. And after the military, I moved to Australia, and now I'm going back and forth to France. And yeah, it's a good life.
good, good. And then, so I guess I will go here. You talked about, people referencing or what they think autism is, Rain Man or The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon. It's one of my favorite characters, but I guess I never really thought about that's the dramatization of someone who, or how culture has interpreted this is how autistic person behaves in that manner that Sheldon, if you're familiar with the character Sheldon, behaves. um so what are some, I guess, other misconceptions we would say about autism that yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as a misconception, it's not entirely a misconception or a myth. That's just a character. It's like
Mhm.
what is your typical black woman? There isn't a typical black woman. There's there's a full rainbow of black women with different perspectives and personalities from all over the world.
Right.
And so it's the same thing with autism. And I think human being, and this is even within the autistic community. Sometimes autistic people, because of something called internalized ableism, they'll believe, oh, okay, well, this is my limitation, and it's not true. We don't actually have limitations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes,
But
we
that's
have.
not just autistic people who don't have limitations.
Right.
None of us do.
Okay.
All of us are infinite.
Okay. And
Hmm.
what are some of the strategies that you find most effective in supporting clients with autism and managing their mental health?
Can you repeat the question? It didn't come through.
Sure. What strategies do you find most effective in supporting clients with autism and managing their mental health?
Okay, so there isn't there. Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's how long is a piece of string? Autistic people are not going to be different from allistic people
Okay.
in the therapeutic process.
Mhm.
And as a counselor, I'm not concerned with their diagnosis, because I'm only listening for that which they came for that would make a difference to their life. So I'm not trying to fix or give them answers. Or the counseling process is one in which the counselor listens, and the person that's coming for that service is being listened to, and they are in an environment where they are able to expand and cultivate who they're being, who they choose to be. And the counselor is a champion for that. But the way they are a champion for that process is not directive. It's not, okay, you should do this or you should do that, or that's not it, not that. So there are several modalities that are available. There's motivational interviewing. There's certain cognitive. There are subsets of cognitive behavior therapy.
Mhm.
But again, uh, as a reminder, autistic people, we don't need therapy for being autistic.
Mhm.
What happens is when someone is marginalized or experiences trauma over a long period of time, sometimes that human being may need support in being able to reconcile that and being able to manage that. So that's what's happening. There's nothing to fix with autism, just like there's nothing to fix with being Black.
Right.
I think I'm getting the vibes of when you had that conversation with JD Samura, where he was talking about, when you start saying autism, it's like you don't look at it as a disability, and where now you just start to get marginalized. And I think that's the point where people are scared of letting letting other people know about autism, so that they don't get boxed somewhere, and that creates the trauma of having
Mm,
to live a life that's not theirs, or kind of be who they can't be. Like he just said, I like my hair, I paint my nails, and I'm good with it, but people don't find me, people like ask me, why are you doing that? But it's like, because I like it, and he does explain it very well
Hmm.
on that episode about
yeah,
his life. And I
Yeah.
think that explains it when you say, you know, uh, how you go about it and manifest in the way you not treat it, but the way you champion. And I hear this word championing again and again, championing for the person who's there for counseling, or who needs that. Um, can I say mental health evaluation? Uh, is it?
sure.
I can say, yeah,
I
okay, yeah.
yeah, I say, let's look at someone personal in your life, someone that you love. Just take any human being that you love. This person they have skills, they have attributes. There are things that you can list that you know that you can count on them for. And there are things that you know that you cannot count on them for.
Okay.
Now, their skills and their gifts and their powers have nothing to do with why you love that person. So let's bring that to working with a neurodivergent population. Why can't we have the same thing? Why
Mm-hmm.
can't we be championed, to use your word? Why can't we be celebrated? Matter of fact,
Okay.
if you look at longevity, right? The most essential, the number one ingredient for longevity is deep, purposeful connection. That is the single most important ingredient in all the blue zones. If you look at all 7 blue zones, they all have that as the number one ingredient. Then, of course, there's diet, exercise, blah, 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 blah. If you don't have deep, purposeful connection, you don't have longevity. And when you look at the neurodiverse global population, the mortality is usually about 50 years old.
Oh wow.
That's WHO data.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so that, in part, when you look at the data, is because people are not connected. Is that the neurodiverse population doesn't have strong connections. Now, obviously, there are going to be outliers on either side, but we're just talking about what the data shows. And so, if we want to make a difference, whether it's within an organization, and maybe within, statistically, any organization is going to have anywhere from 10 to 15% of that, the population of that organization is going to be neurodivergent. Why would we want to make accommodations for them? Because making accommodations for them means that the entire organization is going to perform all that much more effectively. But also, you're not just looking at the performance, you're looking at what is appropriate for human consciousness. Let's take it personal. Look at your body. Is there some part, let's say you go take a shower. Would you go take a shower and not wash the crack of your behind? Of course, you would wash the crack of your behind. You wouldn't wash everything and then get out the shower, because now you got a clean body, but the crack of your behind stank. You wouldn't do that, right? So let's
Right.
take human consciousness as that whole body, wash the whole body, nurture the whole
Mm-hmm.
body, celebrate the whole body, because now the whole body is clean. Now, let's take that example again. Let's say you only wash one part. You tell everybody, hey, I took a shower. And every time you show up to a meeting, but you didn't wash your crack, and everyone's like, yo, that's okay. you you hear how it doesn't work?
It doesn't work.
It, it doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't work for anyone. So organizations, they have to stop looking at, oh, okay, well, if I support these people, we're going to make more money. No, it goes deeper than that. No, you want to support these people because they're not these people, they're you.
Mm-hmm.
Make it personal. Because until we're not, capitalism all across the world is failing. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
it's, you can look at it historically in every environment, and it's dying. It's causing this massive metastasization, can I say that word, across the world. And
Okay.
we have to do better.
Definitely.
We have to start loving one another.
definitely. And
Great.
then, yeah, Sambaza, she can share.
Sure. My next question would be regarding. I think we've talked about misconceptions and supporting the clients, and
Mm-hmm.
how do you navigate yourself in this world? Well, what would be the suggestions of kind of going through life? How would you ask as a parent and as a person who's dealing with it?
Well, autism is not, for me, it is not something that is, I don't wake up one morning and say, oh my gosh, I got autism really bad this morning. It's, that's not how it occurs. What happens for me is I'm listening. I'm 6'5", and I'm 105 kilos. I'm a big guy. So when I walk into a room, just from the physical aspect, people are noticing. And then there's my energy. People notice that. And
Right.
then being responsible for my energy, being responsible for it's called positional awareness, being circumspect. So in being responsible for who I am, it means I can create possibility for the people who are around me, because the people who are around me are not separate to me. They are me. And that's my approach. And because that's my approach, it's how I run my businesses, it's how I do academia, it's how I interact in relationships. I'm listening for what's going to make a difference for this person. What is it that we both need and want? What is a way that we can thrive together? Because regardless of someone being autistic, neurodivergent, or otherwise, that's where we all are. And I'll just briefly touch on depression, because that's also one of the co-occurring conditions for autism. One of the best pills, one of the best medications that's available for depression is to look at another human being and to make a difference for them. That is the hands down best pill to address the symptoms of depression. And I'll give you an example. I have a dog. It's a big dog. He's about 50 kilos. And so he makes a big pile. And so if I were to go and put my face maybe 3 centimeters from that pile, and then someone comes up to me and says, Stone, why do you have your face in that pile? And I say, well, there's a pile there. There's some dog doo-doo there, and I'm looking at it, and the world is really awful, and it stank, and there's flies all around it, and it's horrible. And then that person might say, well, why are you doing that? Get up, look at the sky. It's beautiful, it's sunny. But no, I'm focusing on that pile, and this is analogous to depression.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going through depression, can get up, or someone can help me get up, and I can make a difference to someone else, now I'm no longer looking at that pile. I'm no longer looking at that doggy doo-doo. Instead, I'm out there making a difference. And this is substantiated, um, and peer reviewed. So to answer your question, that is my approach to therapy, to life, to working with people, is listening for that which will make a difference to them.
And I was listening to one of the other podcasts with Dr. Elling, and you both described, because she has this hypersense where when there's so much noise around, she cannot really walk around with. She has to have like earplugs and stuff like that. And I think at one point you mentioned that uh, a neurodivergent person will be the one that will be sitting somewhere with a phone and not care about what's going on around them because of the way they place themselves. I don't know if I'm getting it right, but I think from what I understood is the way you place yourself within a group of people, even though your hearing is of a higher level, but then you're
Yeah.
kind of out of that out of that group to say in that public space. um how do you now teach a child like, hey, you don't want to be like the person on the phone who's looking at their phone, yet there are other people around you. Now we're going to this dog poop analogy and tell them, look around you, you have friends or people who might want to chat with you, but since you're on the phone and they respect your privacy, they'll be like, okay, we're going to let that person be alone and not talk to them.
Well, yeah, that's I thank you for framing that. When it comes to children, it's really important for them to understand that their environment is safe. And it is a detriment to a child, to an autistic child, to force them to behave like everyone else. Because the communication is, if you don't behave in this way, you're wrong. And how does that work? Let's do a parallel. What if you're a different race? Oh, you're black, so you're wrong. We know how that feels. Why would we do that to a child? So it's really important that an autistic child's environment is one that is affirming, that acknowledges who they're being in their environment and lets them know that they are welcome and that they are embraced. And some of these behaviors, for instance, it may be flapping the hands, it may be making loud sounds, it may be continual movement. That's a way of regulating it. Sometimes it's a way of expressing pleasure. It's a way of there are any number of reasons, and it's difficult to say if someone is autistic they have this particular behavior. It doesn't really work like that's not the case. It's a spectrum. What's important is connecting with that person to find out what are their needs and to make sure that they know that whatever's going on for them, that they are celebrated.
Okay, gotcha. Jen, you have any question?
Yeah, you mentioned, Sambaza, when you mentioned the headphones, I immediately, kind of resonated that with some of the things I've seen in children, some good friends who have children who are dealing with it. And I was actually at the nail shop and saw a mother with her child, and that child had on headphones. And I just kind of, noticed that behavior in Stone. You kind of spoke to those behaviors, so that's common, right? That sensitivity to sound, basically, right?
Sure. Even for myself, I don't go into environments that are going to be loud and chaotic. I have uh, 3 different noise canceling solutions. They're not sponsoring the podcast, so I won't mention which ones. Um, but that's something that I figured out for myself. Uh, Prior to my diagnosis, I would just mask and I would say, "Oh yeah, no problem. I can just go into that. I can just go into that environment." But then when I started to really accept who I am and what I want for my life, then I realized, oh, okay, I was doing that and I really didn't feel comfortable in that environment. And so now I just don't. But yeah, I use the earplugs, two other noise canceling headsets. I'm very particular about my environment.
Hmm.
I'm habitual. I have a schedule. I don't deviate from my schedule. It's very consistent.
Good.
Um,
But I bet that right now it's a bit tricky because of the move that you're currently facing.
yes, yes,
So
yes,
and now explain to us how, which actually this is one of those things, those moments. So you're aware of yourself and
yes,
you have a schedule. Your schedule has been disrupted. How are you dealing
yes.
with it?
Part of me wants to stay awake for 72 hours until everything is all clean and organized. And then another part of me says, well, you're not that guy anymore. You need to just do a little bit at a time. Uh, because I also have a thing where if I exert myself, I could have a seizure. So I have this other thing that is keeping me in check. So I have to be an adult. I have to be a responsible person about this. So even though it is unpleasant, I'm not going to let myself shut down just for the neuroses of making sure that everything is organized immediately.
So can you say you're at the point of where you've understood yourself with regard to being neurodivergent or being on the spectrum, that you've taken it, and this is, I mean, you've taken it now like a wholesome approach to it, whereby I know myself, and I, like you said in the beginning, you know yourself, you know which position you play, and now that you don't look at that part where you're told you're neurodivergent as a disability. You just continue living and get along with life as it is, as a human being, like you had explained to us before.
Yeah, yes. I don't I don't know that I know myself.
Mhm.
I know a few things, and I'm constantly in the inquiry. I'm asking better questions all the time. And I'm aware that for most of the human population, they don't. Most humans don't ask questions about their identity. Why are they here? They don't know how to think. They don't know what thinking is. They don't know what an original question is. They have no idea about any of these things. So the fact that I am aware that I don't know, I'm content. I'm content with that part of my journey.
Okay.
It's an evolution.
It
We
is.
are all continuously evolving, and again, to the extent that we allow deep, purposeful connection, uh, that leads to how we expand on the planet.
Okay. And then let's see. You've talked about how you empower and celebrate the people that you work with and your clients, and I love that. Um, how do you? I guess what advice, if any, would you share to other counselors who may be working with other neurodivergent individuals?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would suggest that counselors, especially ones that are older who have not been, maybe they're not neurodivergent themselves,
Mm,
I would suggest that they immerse themselves in the data, that they learn as much as they can, and that they also develop their own cultural competence practice where they are constantly expanding their cultural competence. And the number one thing that they would have to do is to listen, actively listen intently, because the autistic client knows exactly what they need. They know where they want to expand. And so if a counselor can be that, they can listen, that's
mhm.
that's most of it right there. And to be specific, effective counseling is uh, to a larger extent the relationship between the counselor and the client. So
Okay.
um, if a client doesn't have an effective relationship with a counselor, i.e., they don't feel good when they go, they're experiencing, there's something in their gut that's saying, that's not the right counselor for you. You want to
Mm-hmm.
go where you're feeling nurtured and celebrated.
Okay. And then Sambaza, anything else before we have Stone share about his community and his
Right.
podcast?
I have a question, and this regard to the guests you've had on your show. Having listened to your podcast, I noticed if most of them are neurodivergent and also are counselors, and have the have the capability to deal with clients that are like that. What has been your experience with different kinds? Because I know you have had someone from France, you have someone from Australia, not Australia.
Right.
Was it Australia? Yeah,
Yeah,
Australia. The one who was a
France,
construction
US.
worker, and then she then turned into a counselor. How has that
Yes.
experience been relating to other people of your in terms of counseling in their profession?
I really love it. I love the diversity of it because it's a demonstration that we really are the same. And if I look at what is forever, what is the one energy that lasts forever? It's it's love. Love lasts forever. So to the extent that we as human beings are able to tap into that particular energy and focus on that, that brings us closer to, and we fulfill our purpose in life. So that's the thing that I'm noticing in having conversations with such a diverse range of people. Most of them are neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be, and I could be biased in sharing that. I love love, so it would make
Good.
sense that I would see that.
All right. So, Stone, I think Jen will take the next. I think we'll let you speak on your podcast.
Sure.
Before I get on to the podcast, I'll just have one thing to say. I love the intro, the beginning of your first episode when you were introducing the podcast. It was 10 months ago. I think you probably had
Yeah.
the podcast for 10 months ago. So, Jen, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh, yes, and Stone, please share about your community and your podcast. We would love to hear about that.
Sure. Sure. So I started a podcast called Mind the Autism Podcast, and the design of it is to listen to the lived experience of autistic people, neurodivergent people, and their allies. The reason why that's important is because the more we can start to experience the mythical other, the more we're connected. And while the focus is on autism, it's about everything.
Hmm.
There's so much intersectionality. There are people of different genders. There are people who don't identify with gender. There are people of different races. There's all these things that we as humans try to say, oh, we're different, or oh, we can't hang out with you because of whatever. And there are more things that bring us together than push us apart.
Sure.
And so that's the intention of the podcast. I really focus on self-care because as I mentioned, I think at least 3 times, unless we're focusing on deep purposeful connection, we can't expand as human beings. And part of that is self-care. And a lot of people, when they think of self-care, they think of going to get a massage or some type of serendipity thing. But self-care is very similar to uh, taking care of your car. You wouldn't leave your car in a filthy state and then go pick up a friend and be on fumes and say, oh my gosh, we've run out of petrol, and you're in a filthy. No, you manage those things ahead of time. Make sure
True.
you have petrol, make sure your car is clean, make sure it has the appropriate maintenance. Why? Because the car is designed to go from A to B. Self-care. Why?
Yes.
Because you want to function in life. You're not just a meat sack. You're
Right.
here to
Mm-hmm.
be the most expansive expression of love that you are. And
Mm-hmm.
access to that is through self-care. So self-care, its attributes are disciplined. It has to be disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be something that is purposeful and intentional. Those are the attributes of self-care. So when I say purposeful, it should be something that is bigger than your identity. Disciplined means that there's a periodicity about it. You do it on a regular basis, and there's a sacrifice. You never have this thing where you say, uh, I don't have time, or I don't feel like it. Because that's
Okay.
like, you wouldn't get in your car and say, oh, I don't have time to put petrol in the tank. You're going to run out of petrol, and then you can't go anywhere. Of course,
Right.
you're going to put, you would never have that argument. So why do we do that to ourselves? Why do we
Mm-hmm.
not love ourselves in the same way that we take care of other things in life? That's, if we're not taking care of this, nothing else matters.
Mm.
So I talk about self-care because that's really, it's critical, especially in the neurodivergent community.
And Stone, self care could even be something like journaling or deep breathing exercises, wouldn't you say? Or
Absolutely,
okay,
absolutely,
okay,
absolutely. So
Is that part of the
there,
Lomi
there
Lomi?
there's Lomi Lomi could be part of self-care as well. So there's the tactics or the techniques, that's the content, and then there's the framework. So I provided those three things. I provided framework, and then as far as content, you can put anything in there that you want.
okay.
It's like having a car. You can drive a Prius, or maybe you don't want a Prius. Maybe you want a Escalade. I'm trying to remember American vehicles.
You know you're confusing Jen a little bit when you say petrol, because that's
No, I'm
that's.
not.
I was
I'm
like,
not
when you say petrol, I
confused.
was like, okay.
No,
All
that's
right.
a. We've been saying that for years.
You say
Who
petrol?
got?
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
who
used
got
I'm used
snaps
to
on the
petrol when you
petro?
say. Oh,
Have
okay.
you ever
When you
heard
say
of
petrol, I
that
was like,
stuff? That's that cultural thing.
yeah.
We used to say that back in the day. Who got snaps on the petro?
Oh, okay.
Maybe,
I
maybe
got
a
it
St.
now.
Louis thing.
On another topic, Sambaza, I can't wait to discuss more Pan Africanism and
Oh,
the African Union. I get excited every time I
Okay,
oh,
yeah I
we can.
I love that.
We can figure out
good.
something. I know.
Yeah.
And just to let the people know how we met you, how we met to get this podcast going. It was like I said before, it was through collaboration. I was on a Facebook group, um, Empowered Podcasting, and you were there talking about autism, and we were like, okay, wait, mind your autism. Then we were talking about Jen and I were talking about doing it, and I was like, let me listen to the podcast, and hey, here we are having this
Yes.
conversation, and I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah.
You have to
Likewise.
come
Thank you.
into the clubhouse rooms
Right.
sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I haven't been
Yeah,
to Clubhouse for a minute, but yeah, I absolutely love that.
that would be fun.
So, what are we expecting from the show? Because you had season one has ended already, or you're still continuing with the season one?
Oh, yeah, I'm still continuing. I'm
Mm,
still I'm still figuring everything out. I don't have intros or outros or any pretty pictures, no promotion,
Okay.
just having the conversation, really.
Yeah.
Um,
To the extent that I can find the appropriate, because I'm looking for a diversity, a wide range of people, so that people, the listeners, the audience, I don't want the audience to say, oh, okay, that's autistic, or I don't want them to identify one thing and say that's autistic. I want them to,
Mm-hmm.
um, hopefully, learn about celebrating humanity and loving people.
Love that.
and
That's the
that's one thing that you actually mentioned. So the week before, not the week before, but not the show before, but a couple of shows back, we actually brought in a couple who have a kid who's on the spectrum, and we
Mm-hmm.
had this discussion. And one thing they always say is championing for their child. And I remember the dad talking about, if there's one thing this human can give to other people, it's the way he smiles. He has the biggest smile and the biggest heart to everyone. And that's what they're wishing, that, everyone would know him for that, not the other part.
yeah,
And if they knew him for that, and well, I say I'm biased because I know the gentleman very well. And I never look at him in that perspective. I look at him as a normal person to me, right? Well, normal is a cliche
But what is
statement, but
normal, right? Yeah.
so
Right.
yeah. I heard you
so
walking into.
so to me, I'm like, yeah, it's him. We have these conversations with him. He understands us, and we we are he is a lovely gentleman. But if the world would know him as that and not place him like now, that's when you brought JD. And this is where people need to come and listen to your podcast, because like you said, it's not about being on the spectrum. It actually tells you about self-care and learning more about what is going on, because I was expecting something else different. But what you provided for was now like, okay, there is something to that's bigger than just what I look at face value. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's just mind blowing when I got onto your podcast, and that's why I'm really celebrating the podcast because of what I've gotten out of it.
Yeah, yeah. I think some of the outcomes are to, obviously grow the subscribership
Mm-hmm.
on the YouTube channel, and from there create a physical community for neurodivergent people, as well as people of marginalized relationship groups. And the community that we've been talking about is regenerative and autonomous, and we're doing away with capitalism. So living in this community, you're not paying for clothing, accommodation, medical, dental, education, any of those things. You are living in such a way that you are self-actualized.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if you look at spiral dynamics, we're not talking about uh, self-actualization per se. We're more looking at collectivistic actualization. So a whole group of a whole community of people who are actualized, and it's a little difficult to experience self actualization when someone is steeped in survival. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the expansion that we're going towards.
Okay,
Okay.
nice. But you should come to a clubhouse room and have a conversation. Kind of let everyone know. They'll be happy to have you and talk about it a little bit about your podcast, and we'll probably experience growth, and more people will bring in collaboration, because that's what we're
That'd
all
be
about:
awesome.
community and collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, and
You're
we'll
welcome
we'll
anytime.
definitely share the link to Stone's podcast and how you can get in touch with him. Any yeah, we have your link, so we'll share that in
Absolutely.
the
Thank you.
yes, for
Yeah, I
sure.
really appreciate both of you for doing this. It's uh, not a lot of people want to take time to
Mhm.
talk about things that are so this is an important topic, but
Yes.
it's not just the topic, it's the framework in which you're making it available. So this is one piece of content that both of you are doing, and then there's a whole ecosystem where you're inviting people to stand up and be seen, and that's beautiful. So thank you.
Thank
Oh
you.
wow.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you for saying that. I appreciate that. That's awesome. Okay. Anything else to share, Sambaza, before we conclude this great episode?
I am so happy you joined us, considering all the things that have happened over the last couple of days for you and the movement.
Yeah.
But you're staunch and you held it. You held it well, and we had a nice conversation. I really, really enjoyed this
Yeah.
conversation. Thank you
Hmm.
so much. I
Thank
mean,
you.
wait, what
Bye.
is there else to say?
Okay. Well,
Yes.
we appreciate you, and we hope everything goes for the best.
Yeah, yeah, it will. In parting, I'd just like to share with both of you to we talked about love, we talked about counseling, we talked about
Yeah.
relationships. Now let's look for opportunities, specific opportunities to put these things into action. Like the next person you're going to interact with, really consider in your mind, what does this person need for them to experience being celebrated and loved? That's
So
it.
we'll take that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right then.
Thank you so
All
much.
Have a
right.
All
beautiful
right.
day. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. All
So Jen,
right. Well, yes.
that was a very, very nice conversation, and I do appreciate everyone who has hung on with us.
That's for
Considering that
sure.
it was one of those late night episodes. Um, I must say, Jen, this has been really, really nice. Um, I've had a good show.
Good, good. I appreciate you for participating and for your part in coordinating, getting Stone on. You kind of identified that. So yeah, good teamwork. High
Yep.
five. Okay. We have to do it at the same time. It doesn't work.
Oh yeah. Boom.
Okay. All right.
All right.
So okay, guys. Well, we let's see here. If you found, hopefully you found today's conversation and have inspired or enlightened you. If you found it meaningful, please consider sharing it with friends or family. We'll have the audio episode in a few short days, but the replay will be available. So we please share that. We appreciate that. Our collective awareness and advocacy play a crucial role in creating positive change. Stay tuned for more engaging content. We have a lot of great conversations coming up. We have some more autism and mental health episodes planned, so please join us. All right, until next time, take care. Let me find the button. Thanks, guys.